David Wilcock is not only a spokesperson and a friend. He's a friend of yours, of course, but he is somebody out there that has been leading this charge for over 20 years. And for him to be at the brink of this, it's the warmth that you give him now lets him know that he's been on the right path, right? And it's your support with David that lets him know to not give up. We can't. We've got to keep our foot on the gas. That's what he's here to do. He is about to speak to you about the 5 alliances. We are going to connect the dots between them all because everything is connected. This is an afternoon that you're not going to forget. Share the knowledge. Be proud. Things are changing. Get loud. Contact in the Desert 2018 presents Mr. David Wilcock. Let's go.
All right. This is awesome. There's so much to talk about in 90 minutes. And I think I can make it happen for you, but we do have to kind of keep the show moving. Now, I can't see my slides today at all, but I guess they're there. Yeah, okay, so I'm completely masked from, but I do have it up here, so I will know that I've got my slides going. So what we've got for you is the most comprehensive overview of the Alliance's efforts that I've ever done in front of a live audience. So that's a big event for me. And I'm taking it to the next level for you guys. So I've put a lot of stuff in here that I've never really done in a slideshow before to really kind of flesh out the whole big picture for you. So what are we really talking about with these alliance groups? First of all, we're going to talk about the Earth Alliance. And we're going to talk about how there has been an place for many, many years to try to break through to the truth. A lot of times in our community in the past, we have sort of unfairly stigmatized the military as always being the bad guys, or the intelligence community. If you hear a word like CIA or NSA, oh, it's just this horrible thing. But there have always been, and will continue to be, good people in these organizations. Not all of them, but surprisingly more than you might think. And so they have been fighting this whole time to try to get you the truth. And so part of what I'm going to do is honor some of these fallen heroes. And the problem is, since this war is a covert operation, the nature of the war is almost completely obscured to us. We don't understand even what's going on. We don't know the names most of the time of who's been fighting this thing. But the reason why you're here is that you believe that the government of the U.S. and other countries as well is covering up some very deep truths about the UFO phenomenon. And we have been lied to for so many years, while at the same time knowing that through something called vertical integration, that this same military-industrial complex, which actually consults on the Hollywood movies, is showing you the films of the things that you're supposed to not believe are true. Right? It's schizoidal. You're put into a reality box where your perceptions about truth are being fundamentally altered. And we've been given a bill of goods that is entirely false. We've been given a very restrictive paradigm about the nature of this world, the nature of reality, and that cannot possibly be true. This idea that we're alone in the universe, that there's nobody out there but us, that UFOs have never come here, the whole question of ancient civilizations, obviously what we're dealing with there is extraterrestrials coming in and using the native materials of Earth to build structures, hence pyramids and Stonehenge and all this kind of stuff. They didn't want to bring all that stuff with them. They didn't need to. Just use what's native. And if you have anti-gravity, then you can levitate stone of any size and do some really cool stuff with it. The problem with these pyramids is that there's no evidence of construction. There's no evidence of a buildup to how that construction took place. Anthropologists want to see things like pottery shards that show a progressive civilization moving up to the level where those attainments are possible. It doesn't happen. It's not there. Without that evidence, we have to start looking at other conclusions, and those conclusions include the written histories of these people, which we invariably call mythology. And then we assume that it's all made up when they talk about their gods. When they talk about people that looked like them, sort of, but had extraordinary capabilities, including levitation, telekinesis, flying shields in the sky. It's actually all over the Bible once you know what you're looking for in the Old Testament. Flying shields, all this kind of stuff. So it's really ridiculous. It's really ridiculous that we are at a point in our society where we still even have to ask the question why or if. We should have the answers by now, but those answers have been hidden from us. And as I was saying, and I think a lot of you were probably here when I did the talk on the Antarctic Atlantis. Clap if you were here for Antarctic Atlantis. Okay. That answers that. Probably a few of you weren't. But that's okay. So the point is, this group that is running the planet is a lot more interesting than you might think. And it's interesting in terms of like a really great villain in a horror movie or a sci-fi film, but it's like sci-fi horror, really, once you get into this. Because the group that is running our world is a cult. It's a cult that has the books, the documents, and the artifacts, the mummies, the craft, to prove that they are an extraterrestrial invading race, believe it or not. That's what we were talking about. There are people with elongated skulls, the remains thereof have been found all over the world. In South Africa, all over Mesoamerica, Peru, Bolivia. We see all of this stuff in Egypt with the pharaohs, and all of those elongated skulls have been confiscated. We see in Siberia evidence of elongated skulls and miners that dug them up. The Mongolian barbarians that were conquering seem to have elongated skulls. And we find tombs of the elite in Europe in which, when you exhume the skeletons, they have elongated skulls. And they are part of these bloodlines, part of these so-called Illuminati. Then it gets even deeper, as I said the other day, where you find out that the reason why they've been keeping this blood separate is that they might have lost the elongation. Okay, their skulls will revert back to looking like ours due to the basic genetic conditions of Earth and the wave genetic aspect of the Earth, the fact that Earth is going to push whatever comes here to be looking like the biology that is supposed to be here. So if any of these people stay here for very long without leaving, there will be genetic pressure that will actually revert them to look more like us. But there are some who still have the elongated skulls, who don't actually live here, and they have been using portals to come and go from Earth for at least 10,000 years. There's working portals that have been in place the whole time. They come and go, and one of the big places that they come and go from is the Vatican. Believe it or not. So, and we got Emery Smith here this weekend. You got to hear from him. Give him a big round of applause. Now, he got to see a lot more of the Vatican than my other insider, Pete Peterson. Pete Peterson was able to go in there to review certain books and was told that they had books that went all the way back to a civilization that had been on Mars. And that this Mars civilization blew up their planet, which was formerly known as Maldek or Tiamat, and now is just the asteroid belt. And then in the course of events, some of them migrated here right then, 500,000 years ago. Others migrated to the moon. And then the moon was attacked, apparently by the Draco, reptilian humanoids that we've talked about. They do look like a reptilian head on a human body, okay? They're not shapeshifters. They just look like that all the time. But the moon was attacked, and these people crash-landed on Earth 55,000 years ago, more or less. And that is where the legend of the so-called fallen angels comes from. So you have to understand, in the religion of the elite, in the religion of the Illuminati, at the highest levels, they believe that they are human-like descendants from Mars and Tiamat, but that they have the books at the Vatican Library, books from that original civilization before their planet blew up. Books that have, as Pete Peterson said, gorgeous pictures of space stations, spaceships, blueprints, diagrams. Certain books he saw were all filled with code, like some kind of barcode. It's very, very bizarre. And when Emery got to go there to the Vatican Library, he saw a lot more. And he also saw all these artifacts that they were storing in a room that apparently Pete didn't get to go into. And they have been pilfering these things from all over the world. This goes back to the Egyptian priesthood that had done a lot, because Egypt is built on top of the ruins of an older civilization where this all started. If you dig down in the Sahara Desert, 40 to 400 feet down, you're going to find ruins all over the place. And one of the things the Cabal really doesn't like, incidentally, is that there are huge, huge statues buried under the ground of people who look like they are of African descent. And this group is very racist. They consider that the white people on Earth are the descendants of Lucifer. Believe it or not, that these white-skinned people didn't exist here before the folks with the elongated skulls showed up. So the origin of the white race begins with the areas of Europe where they landed, and they had the red hair or the blonde hair with the elongated skulls. Some of them were giants. And then there were migrations of those people, which is why you see these funny mummies that appeared in China, funny mummies that have appeared in Mesoamerica, etc. So look, what I would suggest is to understand we're all descendants of extraterrestrials. There is no purebred native Earth human. We've all had lots of people come here and seed different races. So this group has been ruling through fear, terrorism, intimidation, financial corruption for thousands of years. And during the time of the Crusades, they were able to use the Muslims invading Jerusalem to rile people up and get them to go and fight to get the homeland of Abrahamic religions back. And in that process, the Knight Templars were the military-industrial complex of the time. And they became a breakaway faction. And that led to a point in the 1300s where the King of France and the Pope created this big, big attack against them on Friday the 13th and killed many of them. And that led to them becoming very upset and forming a splinter group. They went off to places like Portugal and Scotland, and they continued to progress. They had the best marine technology, and they became the pirates. So that started in the 1300s. As the European countries are plundering Mesoamerica, these shipments of gold were being interdicted by the Knight Templars, posing as pirates with their symbol, the Jolly Roger or the skull and bones symbol. And that's how they got to be so wealthy. That's how they built up their base. By the 1500s, they had become so powerful with all this hidden gold that a deal was actually struck with the Vatican, a business deal, where the Templars were brought back in secretly, and they formed a partnership. And this is also during the time that you have the Jesuits in the Vatican who are using the confession as the early form of the NSA. Right? Think about it. You have to confess your sins. What you don't realize is that the priest is in there writing all that shit down. This is true. This is history. The Cabal, if you want to call it that, was able to reassert control of the British government in the 1500s with King Henry VIII, and then he started to do really crazy stuff, passing these things called Bills of Attainder, where you cannot oppose him without being killed. And he actually killed several of his wives. He did not get along very well with women. And so as a result of this weird right of succession, his daughter Elizabeth ended up becoming queen. And she had a court astrologer there named John Dee who started to mess around with a cult. And he started to do these weird magical ceremonies and basically rediscovered how to successfully summon negative entities, or what we would call aliens. And these are the Draco. It's the same reptilian types. So when you see gargoyles and these creepy statues of things, that's what they were seeing when they were doing these ritual ceremonies. So it makes a lot more sense once you think about it as an actual extraterrestrial group. These extraterrestrials told the British twice in a row, don't bother to invade, don't bother to counter the invasion of the Spanish Armada that's literally sailing in to destroy England by sea. Let us handle it. John Dee is doing all of his black magic stuff, and he tells Elizabeth, just stand down, don't put any ships out there. Twice in a row, the huge storms appear that completely wipe out the Spanish Armada. All the ships sink, everybody dies. And the British didn't even bother to go out there. That sounds like magic until you think of the idea that they partnered with an extraterrestrial group that is very negative, that had anti-gravity capability, and all they got to do is churn up the water. Then it becomes really easy to see how this happened. So a very, very important point to understand here is that the way this magic works is you have to tell people what you're doing. That way, in universal law terms, technically we are being enslaved by our own free will choice. That's what they would like us to think. But this is also their downfall. Now, John Dee understood this. Elizabeth understood this. Elizabeth's illegitimate son was handed off to her lady-in-waiting, Lady Bacon, and he becomes Francis Bacon. Okay? Francis Bacon becomes the father of Freemasonry because the group, this deposed Knight Templar group, needed to get a bigger membership on the secret side. So Francis Bacon discovered when he was an adolescent that his mother was Elizabeth, and the really shocking thing for him was that he had had sexual feelings for her. So this is where Hamlet comes from. Francis Bacon wrote the Shakespearean plays. The true William Shakespeare was illiterate and only signed his name with an X. And when he died, there were no books in his house, but then he posthumously published 6 more. So Francis Bacon took the Mithraic initiation rites, which was an Egyptian mystery school cult, took all the basic elements of it, the lodge, the aprons they wear, the ceremonies they do, and he turned it into Freemasonry and planted it in places like Scotland and Portugal where these Knight Templars had their safe havens. This allowed them to begin recruiting on a massive, massive scale, having a secret order. And so by the time you're into the 1700s, they've actually got a higher order within the other order, again, to try to recruit more people, and that's the Illuminati. Adam Weishaupt, that came in Bavaria. And they try to tell you, oh, well, the Illuminati died out when Adam Weishaupt died. No, it's not true. It's been around the whole time. So even back in the 1700s, there was an alliance in Russia that was aware that this group existed and has been working to defeat them. And that's a very important point. The original American Revolution was an anti-Illuminati revolt. The Founding Fathers were people that had access to mystery school teachings, but wanted to do the right thing. And that's why they stressed freedom in the Constitution. And they really were attacking the British Empire because they knew there was something very evil going on. Abraham Lincoln was fighting against them. He started to issue a state-based currency called greenbacks, in which the U.S. was printing its own money and flipped the bird to the British bankers. And he got assassinated for that. And immediately after Lincoln was assassinated, the greenbacks stopped being printed, and now they call the Federal Reserve dollar the greenback, kind of conflating history. After the Lincoln situation, at the same time this is going on, these cabal people, these Illuminati people, want to get back out into space because they believe that they are these ancient astronauts that crash landed here, and they had found stasis chambers that were in Ohio underneath one of the rivers. There's a mouth down there you can go into, a cave. And what they found was this glowing stone levitating on wires, and around the stone were these sarcophagi of giants with elongated skulls. And Lincoln went in there and signed his name on the wall of the cave, as did many other of the people during that time. So they've had some really cool inside stuff the whole time. The Vatican is loaded with all kinds of cool artifacts and books that they're not going to tell us about. So there have always been people who understand that they are an extraterrestrial civilization that has invaded, and they see us as useless eaters. They see us as something that gets in their way, and we are protected by a God that they believe is evil because that God ordered up the biblical flood of Noah that destroyed them and their empire, which was Atlantis, as we talked about the other day. So this is a lot of information, I get it. If you haven't heard this before, your head is probably spinning, and you're either going to try to follow along with what I'm saying or go into a very entrenched position of hate, usually correlated with crossing your arms like this. You have to understand here, the scope of the truth is very difficult to even encapsulate into 90 minutes like this. But during the same time that some people were looking at these stasis beings in Ohio, the Illuminati folks were trying to build a space program. And so they started with dirigibles. In the late 1890s, there were all these airship sightings. The founding of the U.S. Railroad was done by Harriman, one of the Illuminati bloodlines, names. And then they say, okay, everybody, get on board the train, the transcontinental train. We'll give you the guns, we'll give you the ammunition. Shoot as many buffalo as you can. Have fun. And they did all this advertising about it. So that was a genocide plan by the Illuminati to destroy Native Americans by taking away their food supply. And it worked very well. It's really, really sad, but that is what happened. This is one of the things you hear from insiders. That was a deliberate attempt, like the idea of giving them blankets coated with smallpox. These people are sick, and they need to be stopped. And what they've been doing is unconscionable. So in the late 1890s, because they owned this railroad, people were having dirigibles, these flying balloons with motors on them, a lot more advanced than anything we saw out in the open, landing, and people coming out who were speaking German and talking to people just randomly landing. And now it's like, oh, it's a UFO sighting. No. This was their early space program. By World War I, their dirigible technology had gotten very advanced. And as I was saying to my wife yesterday, really the worst that we ever hit as a society was World War I. Because the Germans were actually launching chemical weapons out of these dirigibles before they got banned because they were so horrible. The scope of death in World War I is just unbelievable. And it was during that time that you have the Fatima sightings, where these three little girls, or actually it was two girls and one boy in Portugal, were visited by an apparition that they assumed was Mother Mary. It never actually said what it was, except it said, "I am the angel of peace." And then on the 13th of the month, for I guess 7 or 8 months in a row, this flying disc appeared, and it would block out the sun. They didn't have the word flying saucer back then. It shot out rainbow colors of light, and by the final one in October or November, whatever it was, 90,000 people were there to witness this spectacle. And it was raining. And when the whole thing was over, everybody mysteriously had their clothes dried to the bone. So World War I was you know, the Fatima stuff was basically telling us, don't join the war. That was a message to Portugal. And it was a horrible thing, but they ended up going into the war anyway. Then you have World War II, where right after the U.S. joins World War II, we have this infamous Battle of Los Angeles, in which a whole fleet of ships flew over L.A. Lots of people saw it. Thousands of very large munitions were fired at these ships, and some people even died of heart attacks, and the ships were unharmed. So it's very clear these cover-ups occur. Roswell occurs a few years later, 1947. The whole thing's covered up. A lot of speakers here are going to be going through the history of that. We have meticulous data. And at that time, the military-industrial complex got their hands on extraterrestrial technology. Technology that works, technology that can fly around. But they were not anywhere near as successful as the Germans had been, because the Germans cut a deal with the same Draco reptilians that were working with Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth and protected them from the invasion by the Spanish Armada. So this group is real. There are actual extraterrestrial reptilians, or saurians as they're also called. It's very important to understand this. I do not suggest that they are shape-shifting biological beings that look like us. That is a misnomer. David Icke and I have talked about this through kind of a secondhand source. And what I've said is, if you think that you're seeing somebody shape-shift, you're probably just seeing a telepathic overlay of the face of these beings that they're in contact with telepathically. And a sensitive person might see that flicker over their face. It's happened to me. I have seen that. It was really, really shocking. When I met a high-level Illuminati insider and he was shaking my hand, he gave me this devilish grin. His face popped into this thing. And it was very frightening. And even though I was in public in front of other people, I actually just took this step back. And he goes, "How did you like that?" I did not. Okay. Now, it's funny, but it's true. This stuff really is happening. So the Germans, and I have multiple insiders that have talked about this, the Germans, as they're progressing with their secret space program, starting with dirigibles, the Draco basically come in and say, "You guys really need some help. You're not getting it here. Hot air balloons are not going to cut it. Let's give you something real." So they brought in this guy, Victor Schauberger, who had discovered a UFO type of technology. Yeah, there you go. They brought in Tesla's technology, and they came up with a mercury-based turbine that they had in the late 1930s, and they were perfecting it, called the Bell, and it was also called Kronos because it would actually change the flow of time when you fire it up. They had a meeting, and I was told this was in like 1939 in the Himalayas with the Draco. First time the Nazis got to meet the Draco in person. And almost immediately, the Draco gave them all kinds of technology to be able to go out into the universe. So as early as 1939, 1940, you have Nazis traveling around our solar system, discovering there's a lot of extraterrestrials, there's a lot of ancient ruins, and they were given protected space on the moon and Mars to inhabit and to build their own bases in conjunction with the Draco. In the meantime, the U.S. is way the heck behind. They only got Roswell in 1947. By that point, the Germans already almost had 10 years of working on this stuff. And then, as we were talking about in the panel the other day, in 1952, there was an overflight of ships over the U.S. Capitol building. And so literally, people on the ground were seeing a fleet of UFOs flying over the Capitol. It caused a big uproar. There's lots of stuff you can research about this. And we've now heard from multiple insider sources that was the German Armada. They didn't really lose World War II because they still had Antarctica and they still had their technology. They allowed Germany to fall because they couldn't control that part of the war, and they didn't want to reveal their hand. They knew the bigger battle was in space. So they allowed Germany to fall. Hitler was squirreled away to Argentina, where he lived out his life until the 1960s, as it turns out. And there was an interesting show called Hunting Hitler that was from the Alliance, talking about that. And then once I exposed that that show was an Alliance show, all of a sudden it got canceled, which was really annoying. Because they were taking you to places that had all the Nazi insignias, Nazi swastika swimming pool, all kinds of crazy stuff. All in South America. So most definitely, the German initiative continued, and they made an offer that the U.S. couldn't refuse in 1952. They forced them to join this secret space program. So the U.S. military-industrial complex had already been penetrated by Project Paperclip, which was Nazi scientists that came over, allegedly not Nazis, and there were supposedly rules that you couldn't be a Nazi. That wasn't true. They were bringing in all these scientists by U-boats and dropping them off, and nobody even knew what was going on. So they basically just transferred their operations to the United States. It's very important. Also important is to understand that the Germans and the British were not in competition. They were both the same family. Hitler was the illegitimate son of British royalty, believe it or not. And you can look that up. I've done a lot of research on that, showing how Hitler's face is exactly like the face of King George. They're all part of the same family. So they took a British royal and they dropped him off in Germany, and then they create this apparent villain. So this is what I've been saying all along. What these guys do is they own both sides of the war, and their real goal is to try to reduce population and gain control of the planet. So Hitler was British. The Germans and the British were the same. That's why when you do the research, you find out that American corporations were building Hitler's Wehrmacht. Ford Motor Company, I had a college class on this in 1993. Ford, and I would be scored on whether I was right based on answering this question. Ford Motor Company built Hitler's tanks with tank plants in Germany, and when the Allied bombers blew up the Ford tank plants, Ford personally repaid Hitler to rebuild them as fast as possible. I had another class that started the same year, and in that class, my professor said that Boeing had built Hitler's bombers in America, starting them out as commercial airliners. Then they were shipped to South America, where they took the seats out. Then they were shipped over to Africa, where they were repainted as Hitler's bombers and given the right tools, and then sent right in. The whole thing was a big con. It required, the power of the German army required the U.S. Germany was not industrial enough on its own. We had a much more large amount of land and much more industrial power to do this for them. But then the legitimate people in the military were actually fighting against the Germans and won that war. So it's a very complex story. 1952, as I said, the Germans overflew the capital. A secret deal was reached where they agreed to join the German secret space program. And this is all becoming a matter of documented history now. We've gotten it from Pete Peterson, we've gotten it from Corey Goode, we've gotten it from William Tompkins, other insiders as well. So the pieces are now fitting together very nicely. With this in mind, the U.S. starts to go deep black. And by the time Eisenhower got into office, the President of the United States was no longer on a need-to-know basis. And so one of the people we see at all of these events, Richard Dolan, let's give him a big round of applause, everybody. Broke this incredible story where in 1958, Eisenhower tasked this man, who was actually a CIA agent, he never gave his name, this came out in 2013, and this man claimed that he was a CIA agent who actually was hired by Eisenhower to invade Area 51, to lead up that team. And here's Richard Dolan interviewing this whistleblower. So this is the quote from Eisenhower that we get from this whistleblower in that video. Eisenhower, the president, said, "We called the people in from Majestic 12, from Area 51 and S4, but they told us," meaning Area 51 and these Majestic 12 people told us, that the U.S. government had no jurisdiction over what they were doing. What? Well, you all know this, but I mean, for some people, they're totally mind blown right now. You guys are a very educated audience. Eisenhower says, "I want you and your boss to fly out there. I want you to give them a personal message from me." This is new history that we have. "I want you to," and you can see he's just shaking with rage as he says this, right, with his finger quaking and everything. "I want you to tell them, whoever's in charge, that they have this coming week to get into Washington and to report to me. And if they don't, I'm going to get the 1st Army from Colorado. We are going to go over and take the base over." This is crazy. You're literally seeing a massive invasion force. The 1st Army obviously would have been a very large invading force to actually invade and take over Area 51. And he was really serious. He said, "I don't care what kind of classified material you've got, we are going to rip this thing apart." So what ended up happening was that there was a meeting. These people did meet with Eisenhower, these Majestic 12 people, and they were willing to grant him and his inspectors a visit. Now, Our CIA agent guy was not in charge. He had a commanding officer, and the commanding officer and the agent and a few others got to go on a tour of Area 51, where they saw several large hangars that had big garage-style doors with flying saucers inside. So they got to see that. And the agent's boss got to partially interview a gray extraterrestrial that was being held in captivity. So this is pretty amazing stuff. But at the same time, it was sort of like a slap on the wrist. They got to get away with just showing them a little tease. Nothing really happens. So Eisenhower warned in his closing address, which all of us know that one, the rise of unwarranted power and influence by the military-industrial complex. This secret combination exists and will persist until we rise to oppose it. So Kennedy, of course, inherits the presidency from Eisenhower and gets this massive briefing about what's really going on. And he starts to try to pass Executive Order 11110, did pass it, which prevented the sale of silver from the U.S. Treasury. Now, why is that important? Because the U.S. Treasury was getting rid of all of its silver, and that was the only collateral that we had to make a Treasury dollar, backed by silver. So the first thing Kennedy did was to stop them selling the silver off so that they would have enough left to make a non-Federal Reserve dollar. And he was secretly working with the alliance, with these people, to try to get the truth about UFOs, the same people that invaded Area 51, the same military that said, F that, we don't want to be left out of this thing. They were advising Kennedy. Kennedy started to work with them. Kennedy was also working to create a nuclear armistice with the Soviet Union, with Khrushchev. They were having talks about that. All of this is what led to him being assassinated. The next move that the alliance made, very interesting, a year later, almost immediately after, they rushed out this movie, 7 Days in May. And the movie is very interesting in historical context because the movie is about a government conspiracy to overthrow the U.S. So read this from Wikipedia. It says, 7 Days in May is a 1964 American political thriller motion picture about a military political cabal's planned takeover of the United States government in reaction to the president's negotiation of a disarmament treaty with the Soviet Union. That's Kennedy. They told you the truth through fiction. I'm suggesting this is a poster from the movie. I'm suggesting, Mr. President, there's a military plot to take over the government of the United States next Sunday. So this is basically the alliance, the military people, telling you what's really going on here. Showing you the truth disguised as fiction, which was obviously Kennedy trying to get a nuclear peace deal, and the overthrow was him being shot. Here's another picture from that movie, and it says right here again, the astounding story of an astounding military plot to take over these United States. This is the same director that a year before Kennedy was assassinated was already exposing the Nazi mind control techniques they were using to create these assassinations and fake terrorist attacks in the movie The Manchurian Candidate, where the whole point is that this man is going to shoot the President of the United States well under mind control. And in fact, that happens a year later. So they knew Kennedy was threatened with assassination. They put this movie out to tip people off. So it's the same guy that then does 7 Days in May afterwards. Very interesting. So in the meantime, the alliance is fighting for the truth, and this is the alliance that's in the political arena here on Earth, but they're not getting any breakthrough in the UFO embargo, and at the same time, the secret space program is having quantum leaps in technology, time travel. They're building better and better spaceships. They're dealing with more and more extraterrestrial races. So 1972, the Watergate scandal was the next opportunity that the alliance tried to use to really bring down the U.S. and to bring out the truth of what was going on, because presidents became complicit in the secrecy. They got a little bit of information about the secret space program, not very much, but they all agreed on keeping everything quiet. So the alliance knew it had to actually be able to control the airwaves and the presidency if they're ever going to get us the truth. So this, of course, in 1974 leads to Nixon resigning, and Gerald Ford takes office. Nothing happens. The alliance is beaten back once again. Jimmy Carter goes into office. He tries to get UFOs to come out. but he's kept contained. And then the neocon cabal, that part of that faction, set Carter up with a Iranian hostage scandal. And I remember this as a kid. My parents were so upset about it, especially my father, because they wouldn't release the hostages. And it made Carter look weak, and Reagan takes office, Carter loses, and then immediately after Reagan's inaugurated and swears in, Iran just so happens to release their hostages. So this was a secret deal. It's all well known now that Bush Sr. set this deal up with the Iranians saying, let us win, we'll give you a much better deal. Just hold on to the hostages until the election's over. But what happens is Reagan, very soon after becoming president, finds out that this truth of UFOs is being kept hidden from us. And on March 30th, 1981, they attempted to kill him. They meaning the deep state. The reason why was that Reagan, remember, was a Hollywood actor. And he'd played Wyatt Earp and cowboys, all kinds of stuff. Another big Hollywood actor was Jackie Gleason, the infamous funny man, making a very funny face right here. You can see in this next picture, Jackie Gleason was friends with presidents. Here he is hanging out with Richard Nixon, goofing around. And Jackie Gleason leaked to the tabloids, because that's the only people that would listen, that he actually did go to a top-secret Air Force base and saw bodies of dead extraterrestrials. And of course, oh, it's sensational, it's tabloid, it doesn't, no, this was true. So he tells this to Reagan. And Reagan wanted to come out with the truth, but he didn't understand how good the surveillance was. So during that terrible day, May 30th, 1981, this is right before they tried to shoot Reagan, one of the last pictures that was taken. And notice the guy that's immediately to Reagan's left with the bald head. Not the soldier, but the guy with the bald head. That's James Brady. Through some kind of weird divine intervention, James Brady stumbled as the shot was fired, and he took the bullet in his head that was going to kill Ronald Reagan. And these are some photographs from immediately after Brady was shot. You can see the guy there holding his gun in the middle. This is right after it happened. That's Brady, with his back facing us and his feet on the ground. That's where Brady fell. And Reagan is over up against the wall at the same time. There's another shot moments later, probably from the same cameraman. And you see everybody's now got their guns drawn already. Here's another shot of two different people on the ground, one of whom is Brady in the back. And then this is Brady getting closer up. And you can see there's a fallen post there, and there's a grate where he is. And then this is actually a color photo. He did live. He got shot in the head, but amazingly he lived. And so this is where the gun control bill came from. This is Ronald and Nancy with Brady giving their classic laugh, right? So look, Reagan knew that, and they told him that next time we won't miss. That bullet was made for you. Your friend Jackie Gleason might have told you something, but that's not any of your business. A year afterwards, he couldn't help but say something. And this is when Steven Spielberg made the movie E.T. And they had a private screening with many people from the White House all together at the White House, top military people, and Spielberg was invited there, and they did a private screening of E.T. And when Spielberg recently was promoting his movie Super 8 about another type of alien invasion, a negative one instead of a positive one, like E.T. was, this is what he actually said. This is a quote from Spielberg, and he's talking about Reagan. Reagan just stood up and he looked around the room almost like he was doing a head count. And he said, I wanted to thank you for bringing E.T. to the White House. We really enjoyed your movie. Then he looks around the room again, very suspiciously, and says, there are a number of people in this room who know that everything on that screen is absolutely true. That's about as far as he was willing to go to actually tell someone in the public eye what the heck is really going on here. So thanks to the fact that my insider, Dr. Pete Peterson, was working with the Reagan administration during this time, we found out that even Reagan was briefed on the arrival of a massive planet-sized spaceship that came into our solar system that they called the Seeker. It looked kind of like a soccer ball on the outside, had these massive round doors that opened up that were hundreds of miles wide with lots of little ships going around, coming out of them. And they were circling around the outer planets. They would go around Neptune, and they'd go around Uranus. And this is what was happening. So people were really freaked out. And the secret space program people, actually by this point in the 80s, remember, when Reagan gets into office, they pass all this secret legislation that funneled much more money into the secret space program, including the nuclear arms race, which was very, very expensive, and it was all fake, because the Soviets were in on it. The Soviets were also building the secret space program with us. So on the surface, in certain levels, they were fighting, but on the higher level, it's all part of a secret plan to generate enough money. And what they wanted to do was to have their own space platform to have a surprise attack against a real invasion. So the Seeker comes in, and the secret space program people told it to get lost, and basically they claimed they were just peaceful tourists and they left. I believe Reagan got revenge for them trying to kill him by turning against his own cabal level of the administration in the Iran-Contra scandal in 1987. And this, of course, led to the public revealing that the U.S. government was selling arms to an allegedly terrorist state in Iran, taking the money from that illegal, treasonous sale, and then arming the group that was protecting their cocaine business in South America, the Contras, which they call rebels or freedom fighters. But these people were just as awful as any other type of terrorist you can imagine, cutting people's tongues out, doing all kinds of outrageously crazy, evil stuff. So you find out that the U.S. government is claiming to be fighting terrorists when they're actually arming them, and they're claiming to be fighting the war on drugs. Just say no. And wait a minute, you guys are like arming the people that are protecting the cocaine plantations? What? But somehow it didn't bring down the United States government. The alliance didn't get what they wanted. The ET side moved in. This is another thing that we hear from insiders. In 1990 to 91, the entire arsenal of nuclear weapons in the U.S., the USSR, and anybody else who had them all melted down. Believe it or not. And I heard this from, yes. I heard this from Dr. Pete Peterson. I heard this from Bob Dean. I heard this from Jacob. I heard this from multiple insiders. And it was a very bizarre thing. So we don't have nuclear weapons anymore because the ETs will not allow us to have them. The only ones yes, that's true. What they did is they came up with a system that is actually tracking everybody with these satellites from the National Reconnaissance Office. And if you're inside your house, they know where you are by the heat signature. And what this satellite does is it can get about, each warhead can get, I think it's 30 or 60,000 people per second. And it shoots a laser beam through your medulla, and just, you're dead instantaneously. And they have enough of these to get everybody. And that technology was finally leaked in the movie Captain America: The Winter Soldier. That's all they have. They don't have nuclear weapons, and believe me, the ETs are not going to let them use the laser stuff either. But the point is, we do not have any risk of global nuclear war. It cannot happen. It's absolutely true. So this would represent one of the ET alliance groups working to make sure that our planet will not be destroyed, because it's their lives too, and the law of free will allows them to protect their homeland from being destroyed, because they live, in many cases, in these honeycomb earth underground areas. So it's very important to understand, in the aftermath of the nukes melting down, the Soviet Union collapses, they give up, they're like, well, this whole nuclear war thing is fake, we can't keep this up anymore, we need to use our money to try to survive. So they just bow out entirely, because now they know it's not real. And then in the aftermath of that, we immediately get, it's Iraq now, it's terrorists. 1991, Gulf War, all this kind of stuff. So they immediately switch gears. Nobody really even celebrates the fact the Soviet Union was defeated. Now we got to worry about Iraq. Now we got to worry about Afghanistan. And then the alliance tried to make another big attempt in 1995. It was actually before that. Almost as soon as Clinton took office in 1992, the alliance is trying to tear him down with the Whitewater investigation. You have to understand that Clinton and his wife Hillary were running a very elaborate cocaine business out of Mena, Arkansas. Yeah, it's not cool. And so, lock her up, right? That's what somebody just said. That's the real truth about Whitewater. It was the same damn thing as the Iran-Contra scandal that had only blown over 5 years before. The place that the cocaine was coming to was Mena, Arkansas. And there's a really cool movie with Tom Cruise. Whether you like him or not, you got to see it, okay? Called American Made. Go watch that movie. It is the story of Mena, Arkansas. Yes, it's amazing. You've got to see it. So the Whitewater thing was intended to bring down the whole cabal, folks. It was going to include that the U.S. government is trafficking in cocaine, that they're doing it with the power of what became the President of the United States and his wife. And this investigation was being run by the alliance. Here's another headline from Time magazine showing how the president's own men were trying to hinder the Whitewater investigation. And believe it or not, Hillary Clinton, the only time in American history where a first lady was subpoenaed in front of a congressional grand jury for testimony as a criminal. Right? So here's a slide about Whitewater, just so you can see some of the historical context here. It was named for a failed 1970s Arkansas real estate venture by Whitewater Development Corporation, in which Governor, later President Bill Clinton, and his wife were partners. They had accusations of impropriety, improper campaign contributions, political and financial favors, tax benefits. The Clintons were also accused of hiding files, which they claimed to have lost. Just like how they had an unfortunate house fire recently, right? You saw that story. This is Hillary actually testifying in front of Congress, trying to cover her butt. And then, of course, as you all know, Vince Foster, who was one of her closest associates, was going to testify against her, and he suddenly decides to commit suicide. And so there were so many of these that they actually called it Arkanside. So this is the first hero I'd like to honor. This is Vince Foster here with Hillary. Yes. And he was shot, well, he apparently shot himself in 1993, or however it was that he committed suicide. Alleged suicide. So this made people really upset. Everybody that was going after the Clintons, everybody that was involved in the Whitewater investigation, everybody that was going to testify, they all keep getting knocked off. And then we only hear a little bit of the story. So I became aware of the work of Sherman Skolnick in 1996. He died in 2006, and he was this very brave man who actually would take on judges and get them arrested and thrown in prison, corrupt judges. And he was also an expert on airplane crash suicide attacks, right, where people have this allegedly accidental airplane crash, but it's intended to murder the people on board. And so this is him in 1973 talking about a jet crash during the time of Watergate, where that crash was used to sabotage part of the Watergate investigation. So again, this is what the cabal does. When people are going after them, they take you out. And not to dinner. They take your plane out. So this is one of the most incredible articles that really was a foundation stone for me in understanding the alliance. Notice it is before 9/11. It's May 11th, 2001. Just one day after I saw the May 10th, 2001 briefing at the National Press Club with these people talking about the truth of UFOs with Dr. Stephen Greer, the Disclosure Project. So this was very, very exciting for me. This was a very exciting release. And what he was talking about here was the Oklahoma City bombings. And it's a very fascinating story, so check this out. So April 17th, 1995 is the key date. In the spring of 1995, a small group of highly patriotic flag officers were plotting to arrest their commander-in-chief Clinton for giving military secrets to the Red Chinese, a sworn enemy of the United States, an arrest that was provided for and authorized under the military code. So these flag officers were alliance people, okay? And their goal was to try to stop the cabal, because what they do is they arm their apparent enemies, just like they did with the Iranians. So they were going to just jump right over Whitewater, but Whitewater documents actually had a lot of this stuff in there. There was a lot more to Whitewater than what we saw. It was like the Robert Mueller investigation, a different type of that, but the same kind of thing. And it dominated the headlines for years. Yeah. And then it says here, as titular head of both the U.S. civilian and military establishment, Clinton, on the other hand, could have arrested these 24 admirals and generals for mutiny. So I flagged that part in yellow to show you that the number was 24. Now, not all these people traveled together, but unfortunately, a large number of them did travel at once. So he could have arrested them for mutiny, but they wanted to blow the lid off of this whole thing. If they were not assassinated, they intended to defend themselves with proof, such as Clinton giving to the head of the Red Chinese secret police in the White House and elsewhere U.S.'s financial, industrial, and military secrets. They were going to have the proof. So that would have been the end of it. Just like with Watergate, they tried to make that the end of it. Just like with Iran-Contra. On Monday, April 17, 1995, a military jet plane load of these top military personnel, some of them, was en route to Dallas, Texas. They had on board what is not supposed to exist, an American prisoner of war prepared to finger the Pentagon, as perpetuated by Clinton, as continuing the POW missing in action cover-up from the Vietnam War. So they actually had a guy on this plane who was written off for dead as a POW. He's long gone. When in fact he had been there the whole time, still a prisoner, still being tortured, and the U.S. had completely ignored him because they really don't care. On the deeper level, this cabal stuff, they really don't care. So thanks to sabotage, the plane exploded in the air and killed all on board near Alexander City, Alabama. The Pentagon made every effort to cover up what happened. There are strong reasons to believe the plane had a portion of a group of 7 Days in May style military officers plotting a coup against the White House. So this was really serious. This was the alliance, and you saw what 7 Days in May was. Now that movie, of course, was talking about the people that killed Kennedy, whereas this would have been a benevolent 7 Days in May kind of situation. So they all died in this fiery airplane crash. Thereafter, the small group of other flag officers who were now out of uniform hid in Paris, in the suburbs. A year later, the chief of naval operations, so this is like the head guy, right? The number one guy in the Navy for naval operations, Admiral Jeremy Bourda, apparently aware of this planned coup and was planning it behind the scenes. He was assassinated, and it was covered up as a suicide, which is a favorite whitewash by the monopoly press. So let's give a moment of honor, a big round of applause for Admiral Jeremy Bourda. And I'm serious in saying there are so many heroes that have been fighting for us in the alliance that we will never know about. And he happened to be the guy who was coordinating this whole effort. So there was hardly any stories in the news about this crash. This one comes out in the New York Times. You can see by the font there. And this was the same day that it happened. All 8 aboard Air Force jet die in crash and landing attempt. An Air Force jet exploded and crashed today in a wooded area near a subdivision while trying to land at the airport in an eastern Alabama town. All 8 people on board were killed. And it says some names here, which we're going to get into in a second. Now, this is another one from the next day. 8 killed in crash of Air Force jet in Alabama. And this, again, mainstream media, they're talking about this. And it says, the other victims cannot be identified until identities are confirmed and relatives are notified. So they only named a few names. Then on April 18th, which again is the day after, it says, a probe begins in the Air Force jet crash. And this is from UPI. So this is the one we're going to read from now. Among those killed was Clark G. Feister, the Air Force Assistant Secretary for Acquisition. Feister, age 61, was a close friend of Defense Secretary William Perry and was responsible for Air Force research, development, and acquisition. Feister had 38 years of experience in designing and developing advanced intelligence, electronic countermeasures, and imagery systems. So this is a guy who is very aware of the most advanced types of surveillance. And so let's give a big round of applause for Clark Feister here, another brave soldier who did his part with Admiral Borda, and he very likely was the guy who had built the surveillance systems that had caught the cabal red-handed with the information that they were going to release under the guise of the Whitewater investigation as this attempted coup. Also killed was Feister's military assistant, Air Force Colonel John Clark. Unfortunately, there's so many John Clarks I can't find a picture of him online. And Major General Glenn Prophet II, a senior leader in the Air Force, who was the Director of Plans and Operations for Air Education and Training Command at Randolph. And let's give it up for Glenn Prophet II. It's so frustrating. They got so close. They got so close to pulling this off, but too many of them were in one plane at one time, and the plane got taken down. Prophet was a command pilot with more than 6,000 hours of flying experience. He began his Air Force career in 1965. He was responsible for developing and implementing operational plans, programs, and policies for undergraduate flight training, NATO jet pilot training, survival training, combat training for airlift tankers, and special operations, i.e. black ops crews. So you can do the math here. He's the guy that went in and got the POW out of Vietnam. Give him another round of applause. This is really serious stuff. So then it says the other victims were identified by the Air Force on Tuesday as Major Hubert Fisher, who was assigned to the Pentagon, and retired Air Force Major James Horn. So these were some of the other guys in the crew. The two-man flight crew, Captain Paul Carey, an Air Force instructor pilot, and First Lieutenant Paul Bowers, an aircraft commander, also died in the crash. They don't say anything about this other guy. The name of the eighth victim, a U.S. Army sergeant, was being withheld pending notification ex akin. That's the POW. They don't want to tell you who he is because it would blow the lid off of the thing. Air Force officials at the Pentagon declined to speculate as to the cause of the crash, but witnesses on the ground reported hearing at least 2 explosions as the plane flew over a busy highway near Alexander City and fell into the thick woods near a subdivision. Whoa, 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 hold on a minute. Eyewitnesses are hearing 2 explosions. That's not a typical plane crash. That's a bomb. It was either blown up from inside the plane or it was shot down. And these are top military people. Don't you think that there would have been this amazing wave of national indignation? Everybody's calling for an investigation. Everybody wants to know what the heck is going on because you got top military people clearly shot down in an airplane. There's some kind of conspiracy. It's like JFK all over again. But then we got a little bit distracted the day after we heard about this. The very next day after the names of the victims were released, they didn't even give it 24 hours. And what I heard from Pete Peterson was that all of the juiciest documents in the Whitewater investigation were being stored in the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. So they took out the people that were doing the planning, and then they destroyed the cache of all the documents by actually blowing up the entire building. Now, if you weren't into all this back then, let me just share this with you real quick. The little bomb that Timothy McVeigh made in a frickin' van could not possibly have been strong enough to blow the shit out of this building all the way up to the top floor. This was a controlled demolition. And interestingly enough, they had planned on a much larger part of the building coming down, if not the entire building, collapsing into its own footprint, but several of the explosives failed. So the building remained standing, as you can see here. This was a dry run for 9/11. They wanted to test it out. They wanted to see, will we be able to get away with this, with all of the funky problems and all of the kind of botched cover-up, and do you really think that this little bitty van with a little bomb in it would have done all this damage? It's impossible. First of all, the surface of the van itself would contain a lot of the explosion. And so it doesn't even make any sense. But you can see it right here that it was, I took this right off of Google, April 19th, 1995, just 2 days after the plane crash. Do you think anybody's thinking about that plane crash after Oklahoma City? No. The Whitewater investigation grinded on for a few more years, and Clinton actually ends up getting impeached over other things. The alliance just hit him the whole time he was in office, but it never really worked. 6 years, and so all the key documents were lost, by the way, in this bombing, as I just said. So only 6 years after the alliance effort was destroyed with the airplane and destroyed with this building coming down is when 9/11 takes place. And you might not have ever thought about this before, but the Pentagon was hit on the bottom floor. And the exact part of the Pentagon that was hit was the alliance's headquarters. Read this. This is off of New York Times. When hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 hit the Pentagon on September 11, 2001, it destroyed much of the Navy Command Center. It smashed directly into the office of the Chief of Naval Operations Intelligence Plot, killing 7 Navy and civilian employees. That's right. The Chief of Naval Operations Intelligence. The Navy has been the key force doing this alliance. The Air Force has cooperated as well. But think about the scope of this, because there was also an investigation so the alliance was conducting its investigation to try to bring down the cabal. That's what the whole hanging Chad thing was about. George W. gets elected into office not by popular vote, but by a Supreme Court vote, which wasn't even correct because the other hanging Chads were actually in favor of Gore. And I'm not saying that Gore would have been much better than Bush. It's sort of like, which type of torture do you want, you know? But the point is, it was still, yeah, thank you. It was still a coup, and it was still really shady. So what happens is, the alliance was diligently working to bring down the Bush administration. The headquarters, again, Naval Operations Intelligence, the chief was running this thing. He gets blown up, all his people get blown up, and all of the financial investigations that they were doing into the cabal and what it was up to, all those documents were in, guess what? The World Trade Center. So they blew up the World Trade Center, brought it down into its own footprint, just like they had 6 years before, Oklahoma City, same situation. So this was a precision-targeted attack against the alliance. They never gave up, though. They kept working behind the scenes. They already had surveillance in place in the White House prior to 9/11. They have footage of these guys planning 9/11. That video will come out as this whole process, yes. So they really amp up, and this whole time we're hearing about these heavy-duty plans for mass arrests. They're really serious about it. I'm getting this documentation on all this by the year 2009 from Pete Peterson, and it's a very stunning story that most of you have been with me through this. It's been many years now, but boy, oh boy, is it not getting exciting. I mean, there's so much getting ready to happen. Wow. So around this time is when I start to get inside information that reveals a much deeper story of why this alliance effort matters so much. As you've heard me say before, in 2003, I meet this guy, Daniel. And he claimed that he worked on a project where they reverse engineered a seat from a UFO, and they could get trained psychics to sit in the chair, think about a particular place, and then a portal would open up, and if you pushed somebody through that portal, it would take them to that place. And it worked for space and time, so it was a time machine. Now, I interviewed this guy for years, and he never, ever stumbled and gave me all this information, including the fact that there is an ancient Stargate network all over the universe and all over our galaxy, of which each planet has one gate, and they had deciphered the coding of the gate system and used that basic knowledge to build the IP address system that we now use for the internet. So when DARPA designed the internet, they did it in homage to the same codes that they use, more or less similar codes, in the Stargate system. Really fascinating. So then, 2007 is when Henry Deacon pops up on the scene with Project Camelot. This is the first time that I get introduced to somebody who's claiming that he's working in a base on Mars. And I traded information with Project Camelot about Daniel to get access to Henry Deacon, and I spoke to him for a total of over 80 hours on the phone. And we got into so much depth where he would go to work at a typical military base in the UK. He'd go through this machine called the corridor, and then on the other side, he'd end up on Mars, and he'd take a sub-shuttle bullet train type of thing to get to his office. And he was responsible for repairing advanced technology. He saw many, many different types of extraterrestrials. He estimated, I forget exactly how many, I think he said 200 different types of extraterrestrials that he had seen, many of whom he had meetings with, and he said that there was 260,000 personnel working at the base that he was at on Mars, and only 10,000 of them were born on Earth. It's stunning, stunning information. And we're peaceful with these beings. We're engaged in trade. Extraterrestrials are already a part of our lives, and he was working in this very, very classified program that hardly anybody has access to. So then 2 years later, I meet Emery Smith, and now you guys get to meet him. By this point, I'm already talking to Deacon. I'm already aware that they are autopsying beings, because obviously some of these beings die, but I had no idea how many. I had no idea, as Emery tells me, that there's 3,000 different specimens that he took. It's unbelievable, the scope of this thing, okay? So Emery gave me all this information about exobiology. We've heard that throughout this weekend, and I didn't think he would ever come forward. And he lost it. I mean, he burst into tears telling me his story, and it was incredibly compelling. During this exact same time window, 2009, Pete Peterson suddenly popped up. He gave Carrie Cassidy an interview. She sends me this WAV file of it recorded, or it was an MP3, and I listened to it, and I said, we got to get this guy right now. So I paid for the flight, I paid for the hotel, I paid for the rental car. We flew out to where he was. We stayed in a hotel nearby. It was a beautiful country area. And right that time is when we got the Pete Peterson interview captured on videotape. And it was stunning because he continued to talk to me after this, and he revealed that there was a huge plan in place for this alliance to break down the cabal, and they wanted to tell us everything that's going on. They wanted to give us the whole truth. And this is where I first heard about the plan for mass arrests. They want to grab a whole bunch of these people all at the same time. But you look at the murderous opposition. You look at Eisenhower trying to invade Area 51, and they just give him a little taste and say, now get out of here. You look at Kennedy trying to bring him down. They blow his brains out. You look at, they try to bring down Nixon. He resigns. They never got to do the whole thing. He just said, oh, I'm out of here. You know? Then you look at what happens with Reagan. He's trying to tell us the truth about UFOs. They try to shoot him, and the only thing he can do a year later is talk to Spielberg. Then you look at what happens with Iran-Contra. We get revealed that our government is trading with our terrorists and doing the cocaine business, right? Ollie North was running the cocaine business. Then you find out that the people who were actually running the cocaine business run for president and win as the Clintons. And then somebody tries to arrest them, top military coup, and those poor guys get shot down in a plane, and before anybody has time to investigate, out comes Oklahoma City, which conveniently destroys all the documents in the Whitewater investigation. Then 6 years later, they pulled it off again. Head of Naval Operations. They shoot a missile, which they said was a plane, right into his office in the Pentagon, blow his ass up, and then take down the towers where they had these documents that they were doing for the investigation. So the alliance is really pissed, obviously, because this group has been controlling the press. You can't just come out with this stuff. You can't just tell people what's going on. You're going to get killed. And there's been many, many of these types of things. We only get to know some of these people. Around this same time, just a few months later after I meet Pete Peterson, I'm at a Project Camelot event, and I meet Jacob. And Jacob was this guy, as I've said before, working for the Rothschilds at a very high level, and he was acting as a whistleblower, telling me he didn't want to go along with this anymore, and he wanted the truth to be known. So that's when I start to find out the awesome scope of this secret space program that we have. That we have bases all over our solar system, all over the galaxy, that we're in contact with many, many different extraterrestrial races, and they're engaged in trade. And in certain cases, Jacob had to assassinate extraterrestrials who had reneged on a business deal, and that was why he was so highly valued. That was one of his skills. He had to load an alternative personality with an accent and everything else, and he told me you couldn't get guns through these portals. So the typical favored method that he would use is it would appear that he was giving them a gift of a potted plant. But then the plant is actually got a knife blade in the bottom of it, and he'd pull the blade out and stab this being. So he literally was doing that kind of stuff. Interestingly enough, I first did get contacted by Corey Goode back in this same year of 2009, but at the time, he only told me a relatively benign amount of information about what he was doing. So it wasn't until he came out in 2014 and gave me this information about the secret space program that all the pieces were filled in, pieces I didn't have before. We learn about this race called the Draco, which was clearly being portrayed in the movie Jupiter Ascending. They don't really look like this, okay, with the wings and everything, but it's not that far different either. Same guys that did The Matrix made this movie. And you see that these reptilians clearly are working directly with some sort of secret government force. They're very menacing, they're very upsetting. And again, this is not exactly what they look like, but it isn't a whole heck of a lot different either. And so, see this face, and then this is what Corey is saying it actually looks like. So not a whole heck of a lot different. And there's a subservient race they have known as the Reptoids, and they look like this. And so you can see this is some pretty disturbing stuff. The German aspect, the Nazi aspect, is helping the Draco. That's called the Dark Fleet. They wear these kind of uniforms. It was very fascinating when I had Whitley Strieber on my panel at Conscious Life Expo last year, and he reported, remembering in his abduction experience, people that were human with black uniforms involved in his abduction. So Whitley Strieber was probably contacted by the Dark Fleet, didn't even realize that this is what was really going on. So the 5 factions of the space program, Solar Warden appears to be the one that Henry Deacon was in. It's the guardian of our solar system, protects our air traffic. Then you have the ICC, or Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate. That's a group of the corporations, the defense contractors, that broke away and said, we're going to do our own thing. And they even broke away from the rest of the space program. They have some interaction with it, but not a whole lot. Then you have Global Galactic League of Nations, which was the kind of apologetic cookie thrown to the world leaders, where they get to go to one planet, they have one base, and they're told that's an outpost to defend against extraterrestrial invasion. So they get some cool stuff, but they really have no idea what's going on. You have a military faction that provides security and logistics for the other factions. Then you have the Dark Fleet, as I just said, and there's also certain small groups called scout groups. So some of the overview here, there's over 100 colonies that they've built just in our solar system. They're mining, and then they have living quarters near the mines. They take the mined material, and they go to these massive manufacturing plants. And let's just try to skip ahead a little bit here, because I am getting the warning here, so that we can talk about these alliance factions. Okay, so let's go to this. This is a good one. So I'm working with Corey Goode, and he's telling me about that an alliance is formed within this secret space program, and it includes different parts of these 5 factions. He gives me the whole story between October 2014 and February 2015, and on February 27th, The Blue Avians, this group that nobody had ever seen before, asks for Corey by name. It's pretty amazing. And so on March 1st, he was actually taken up and transported to the Lunar Operations Command in this craft, which is what he calls a DART, 2 seats in the front and 3 in the back. And then he got into a room. This isn't exactly what it looks like. This is kind of an artistic interpretation, but it was a conference room in which these beings appeared behind him as he's meeting in front of this Secret Space Program Alliance. And the Secret Space Program Alliance is telling him they want to release all of their technology to humanity. They do not want this to be kept a secret anymore. Give them a big round of applause, everybody. It's fantastic. Now, they have been heavily attacked by other parts of the secret space program. They have not been able to get their goals reached, which is really sad. But then, as a result of Corey and what happened, we hear about the Sphere Being Alliance. Now, this is also some very fascinating stuff because beginning in the late 1990s, all these giant spheres started coming into our solar system. So this is from June 2nd, 1998, and in this animation you see these 2 gigantic planet-sized objects crash into the sun, and then a huge plume of solar radiation coming out, which NASA said was unrelated. Okay? But the size of those objects are literally planet-sized. Another really cool one is July 31st, 2002, and you see right here that on the left you have Mars, and on the right is this sun cruiser. Don't worry about the straight lines on the sides. That's just it's blowing out the camera with its brightness. The very next day, August 1st, 2002, the sun cruiser has disappeared. A planet-sized object just took off. And there it is the day before, and then there it is and it's gone. Mars hasn't moved. There it is again, and it disappeared. So Corey was told that these sphere beings were being here to protect us from the sun going off and giving a big solar flash before we're ready. And this is a big subject for my Ascension talks. They also used these spheres to transport him to the Lunar Operations Command, and he was able to see these spheres all over our solar system, buffering the energy coming out of the sun. So the Blue Avians are a really fascinating part of this because they appear to be the source of the Law of One material, which I'd been a scholar of since 1996, and I'm probably the world's expert on it. I think everybody would agree with that. So they actually, thank you. So they came back and they gave us a personal visit, thanks to Corey. They also showed up with these golden triangle head beings, as they've been called. And these guys, again, showed up on the very first day. So that's a big part of this. Another huge part of the 5 alliance groups is the Inner Earth Alliance. Later on, Corey got to meet these beings that are apparently like what we would think of as Pleiadians or Nordics, traveling in these traditional flying saucers like the Billy Meyer and Semjazi story. That apparently is these Nordic extraterrestrials coming from inside the Earth, and they are also working very diligently to try to bring us the truth. And so this is some of their under-Earth areas. This is Corey's artistic renditions of what they look like, a certain group. And this is the Priestess Kari that we've heard so much about. Various other groups illustrated here, some of which look Asian and have darker colored skin, some of which look like they're from Africa. And it turns out that these people are, in fact, coming from our future, Earth's future, and they are very interestingly involved. So the second to last group here, because I am being kicked off the stage and I don't want to be disrespectful to the next speaker, the next group is the Military Industrial Complex Secret Space Program. And so this group is working within the lower level space program where they don't have access to the deeper levels. And this group was built to be a fall guy, where they revealed that they have some space platforms and they have ships that can travel our solar system, but then they're going to tell us there's only 1 or 2 ETs, if any, and there's nothing really to know out there. So Corey was abducted by these folks. He was interrogated and put through torture and outed people in the Secret Space Program Alliance. And then this is also where we found out about that they now have in the Military Industrial Complex group these triangle-shaped craft that are very advanced, and they've been shooting down the Draco as the Draco have been trying to escape our planet. So that's what these Draco craft look like with the extended teardrops. And here's the Triangle Craft. So let's give them a big round of applause for doing their part. Most likely, this is what we're going to hear about first. They're triangles. We're not going to hear about the Draco right away. The last group that I wanted to get to before we were out of time here, which I basically already am, but, you know, it's just a lunch break, so a little bit of flexibility is okay, is the Olmecs. So after Corey had been brought up there, he was introduced to this man who identified himself as Micah. And Micah said that he was part of a group that he was the equivalent of Corey Good on his planet, where he was the first person that had been contacted by the Blue Avians again, and his planet, like ours, had been enslaved by the Draco. The Draco always do this behind the scenes. There's laws of free will where they can't openly appear. They have to contact people who think of themselves as elites, get them to form a cult like the Illuminati, get them to control and dominate the planet while working behind the scenes, and giving them a secret space program that the people don't know about. And that becomes a breakaway civilization. Micah's people are fascinated by our music. They have 70s music on playlists that they listen to, believe it or not. I don't blame them. It's great. It's a great era. And they did at one time come here and land in Mesoamerica, and they were extraterrestrials, and they built these huge heads of themselves, which again look like people of African descent, but somehow they end up in Mesoamerica. Well, that's the same group. That's Micah's group. So they did come here for a while, and they built a lot of these giant heads, as you can see here. It was a fascinating series of archaeological discoveries that were made. And they are essentially working to help us get through this transitional phase. So yeah, let's give them a big round of applause. All of these different groups are working together, and they're all working to try to bring us into a common understanding, a common sense of what's really going on and where we need to go as a planet. When the truth comes out, we are going to get such an incredible, incredible piece of information dropped on us, and that's where I'd like to, again, if you didn't hear it yesterday, I want to go through this again, 2 days ago, where the President of the United States teased that there's going to be a sixth branch of the U.S. military called the Space Force. This is incredible stuff. 6 weeks after Trump told a crowd of U.S. Marines at Miramar Air Station, he's at it again, teasing the idea of a Space Force. And this was done while he's giving a trophy to the Army football team. And he says to them, "You will be part of the 5 proud branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, and Coast Guard. We're actually thinking of a 6th military branch, and that would be the Space Force." Does that make sense? It's happening. Because we are getting very big in space, both militarily and for other reasons. This is the MIC part getting ready to come out about the flying triangles. And we are seriously thinking of the Space Force. And then you can see, here he is, you know, Space Force could be number 6. It's right on CNN. And I want you to look again closely at these guys behind him, because they can't stop laughing. They don't think this is true. They're not on a need-to-know basis. And so back in March, he said, we're going to lead again. You see what's happening. Rockets going up left and right. You haven't seen that in a long time. Very soon, we're going to Mars. And you wouldn't have been going if my opponent won, that I can tell you. My new national strategy recognizes space as a warfighting domain. We may even have a Space Force. Then he goes, well, no, we will have a Space Force. And we have the Army, the Navy. I was saying that the other day. Maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. That could happen. That could be the big breaking story. He knows already. This is getting ready to happen. That's why it kind of drives me crazy, in a sense, that we're doing this conference and it hasn't quite happened yet. All 5 of these alliance groups getting ready to break the news. And then we had, as I said, this is definitely worth repeating in case you missed my other talk, QAnon, which again, this was, yes. In case you don't know, there's an anonymous chat forum called 4chan, and on 4chan, what clearly seemed to be the President of the United States and his top military people begin posting anonymously as Q. They gave you tons and tons of clues that it was the Trump administration. They didn't even hide it. And what they're doing also is taking pictures from inside Air Force One and giving you information leaks before it comes out. They teased that something was about to happen, and then Saudi Arabia has this whole thing go down with the mass arrests there. That's a big precursor to what's going to happen here, by the way. Totally amazing. What I want to end on is, yes, May 10th, just not too long ago, at the bottom of this passage, they say Sky Event. And that seems to be linked to this, which was the picture they posted of this weird hotel that has a ship on top of it. Marina Bay Sands Hotel in Singapore. Look at this thing. You can see it almost looks like a cigar-shaped aircraft, just like what we hear about in Solar Warden. You can see people can hang out up there, have drinks. And so do you think maybe this was intended to suggest a ship flying in the sky? And I've talked about how we're now up to 30,000 sealed indictments. And you can see that right here. Through April 30th, the last time it was listed, 28,937 sealed indictments, guys. And there it is right there. This is unbelievable. So the last big step is going to have to be a horrific economic collapse like 2008. And people have been asking me, what do you do with your investments? I tell you, I'm saying if you want to sell now, that might be a good idea. But if this happens and you're still holding on to stuff, do not sell as it's crashing. Hold on, because the alliance apparently is going to redo the financial system. So we are so close to the edge here. We are so close to this amazing transformation. All this stuff is getting ready to happen for us. And it is so incredibly exciting to me, because here we are living in this conscious geometric universe, right? I'm going to be talking about that on Monday. Don't miss my Monday talk. And also, in case you didn't hear this, Emery Smith is coming on around 1 o'clock, 1:15, and I'm going to be on stage with him as well on Monday. I'm doing double duty on Monday, 6 hours, back to back. Yes. I kind of got volunteered into this, sort of like the Alliance does, you know? So we're going to be talking about all of his background in the secret space program. When I do my thing, I'm going to be giving you the scientific proof of ascension, including the recent solar flash that happened on our closest neighbor, predating what's going to happen with us. So there's such a big story going on here. And these 5 alliance groups are working to give us the truth. They're working to bring real disclosure to humanity. And that is so exciting for me. It's an incredible, incredible opportunity that we all have, because this is real. You look at what they're doing, you look at these 5 groups, and you look at where this is going, it is absolutely stunning. One last thing I do want to say. My website is divinecosmos.com. And coming up at the end of July, I have an all-weekend, 17-hour event that's going to be the grand download of all the things I have to tell you guys about the science, about ascension, about the secret space program, insider testimony, so much more than I can compress into this little 90-minute talk today. So please, if you want to, go check that out. And this is all the time I have. They're yanking me off the stage. 5 alliance groups. Contact in the desert, everybody.